What's going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. In today's review, we are going to be taking a look at two $2,000 IEMs, being the 64 audio U12T and the Sony IER-Z1R. Now, these are two of the premier in-ear monitors from both 64 and Sony, and these are both very highly regarded among the community. And today we will be taking a look at them and seeing which one you should buy. But before we hop on into today's review, just have to go give a little disclaimer. The U12T was loaned to me for review by Bloom Audio. Bloom Audio is an online audio retailer of many different brands. He has sent me a few things in the past to review. So once again, big thanks to him for sending these out for review. The IER-Z1R was provided by a viewer for review, so big shout out to him for letting me borrow this for a couple weeks to take a look at. So hopping on into the review, as I mentioned before, these are both $2,000 IEMs, so I thought this would be a very fair shootout here. So starting off with specs, the U12T comes in at $2,000. It has 12 balanced armature drivers, a frequency response of 10 to 20,000 hertz, an impedance of 12.6 ohms, a sensitivity of 108 dB a milliwatt, and that is about all the relevant specs for this. The IER-Z1R also comes in at $2,000. It is a 40 ohm IEM with a sensitivity of 103 dB a milliwatt, a frequency response of 3 to 100,000 hertz. It is using 2 dynamic drivers and 1 balanced armature. Okay, so let's go over the build and accessories of these two IEMs. So starting off with the U12T here, these have a metal construction with a silver finish, as you can see. I have seen a lot of these with dented faceplates, so it seems to be somewhat vulnerable to drops, so be careful with them, but they are a metal body all around. As for the cable, I can't say I'm much a fan of this cable. It's a very plasticky, kind of stiff cable, but it is using just a standard 2-pin connector, so finding a replacement for fairly cheap is quite easy, and I would definitely get a replacement cable. As you can see, it's already coming undone here. With them you get this little carrying case here, and inside you'll find a few things. You'll find usually you have some tips in here, a cleaning brush, a little clip to hook it on your shirt, and you'll also usually have the different Apex modules, and I was only given one set of them, which is the M15s, but there is usually also another module in here. And basically the only difference between the modules is the M20 adds a couple extra decibels of isolation and a tiny bit more sub bass. Talking to Critical, he told me it was only about 1 or 2 dB more, so not too much of a difference there. But for this review, I only had the M15s, so that is what I will use. Now, I have to say, I'm not a big fan of this case. The way they want you to store it is you stick both IEMs in here, you run the cable down, and you wrap each half of the split around each separate post, and then once you get to the Y split, then you wrap the entire thing around that bit, and it's very annoying, takes a long time to do. So personally, I would probably get a third-party case for these. I'm not a big fan of this particular case. Now, as for the IER-Z1R, these are a very heavy IEM with a very solid metal construction. Has a nice little decorative metal faceplate kind of finish there. I forget what this is called. There's a term for this. You can write down in the comments if you know what it's called. But yeah, it's a very nice looking, solid, heavy feeling IEM. Now these come with a lot of tips, both silicone and foam, which is called Triple Comfort, and you will see them in the box. So a lot of tip options for these with a lot of different sizes. And these come with 2 cables. The one I have here is just the 3.5mm cable. This cable is all right. It's fairly pliable. Not the best cable I've ever seen, but it is definitely a very serviceable cable. And you also get this exact same cable in 4.4mm balanced for those of you that have a device that uses 4.4mm. And then you have this little carrying case here. It says Sony on it with a brushed aluminum top. There's a little holder that they come in, but you can pull this whole thing out and just stick the IEMs in here with the cable if you want to use this for a carrying case. And the IER-Z1R comes in a big fancy box that I showed you in the intro, so I hope you enjoyed the unboxing experience on that. Now moving on into the comfort, the IER-Z1R is definitely going to be a problem for some people. It is a very fat IEM. As you can see, the nozzle is really wide the whole way down. It's a very big IEM to start with, so even getting this to fit in your ear is going to be a problem for some people. But then you can see the nozzle really doesn't taper off that much from the body. It does taper down a little bit, but not too much. And then it just goes to a little small bit. So getting this to fit in your ear if you have a smaller ear is definitely going to be a problem. And yeah, so this is definitely going to be for people with larger ears. And it also is quite heavy. I did not personally find this to be super, super comfortable. What kind of got to me too is this little like wing or edge here that pushes against your ear to hold it in place. That kind of got to me after, I'd say maybe 45 minutes or so wearing them. So to me, personally, this is not the most comfortable IEM out there. Now, the U12T is a much more traditional fit in terms of an IEM. You know, it just sits in your ear about like so, very standard size nozzle, and just goes right in your ear. This one I found much more comfortable. This is a much more traditional IEM fit. Not the most comfortable IEM I've ever worn, but it is fairly comfortable for me. And yeah, I don't think too many people are going to have a problem with this. Now of note too, with the U12T, you also can get a custom version called the A12T. So you have that option for these as well at no extra charge. It will also be $2,000. Okay, so now moving on into the sound of these IEMs, we will start with the U12T here. Now moving on into frequency response, the U12T to me seemed to have a little bit of sort of a harmonious shelf, like a 5 or 6 dB shelf below 100 hertz, so they definitely have a good bit of bass boost. After that, you have a relatively, I'd say, neutral lower mid-range, and then it comes up to, I'd say, a little bit of a 2K forwardness, and a fairly neutral to slightly recessed upper mid-range, and a fairly neutral treble region with a decent bit of air. So overall, I would say these are a warm to warm neutral kind of sound signature. It's not overly bright. The mids are about in line with where you'd want them, maybe slightly recessed for some people, and a relatively neutral treble region to me. I quite like the tonality of these. This is a lot how I would prefer my IEMs to be tuned. Moving on into the IER-Z1R. The IER-Z1R also has, I'd say, a similar level of bass boost. I'd say also probably a 6 or 7 dB bass shelf there below 100 hertz. After that, they seem to have a slightly recessed mid-range in your lower mids in that like 200 to 500 hertz region. It seems a little bit recessed and kind of thin. After that, they come up to a somewhat forward upper mid-range. You have a little bit of a rise there at like 2.5, 3K. There's a little bit of forwardness there. And these have a little bit brighter treble than the U12T does. This seems to have a little bit of a peak there at around that 6, 7-ish K. There's a little bit of a forward upper treble there, a little bit more so than the U12T. So this one is kind of a W-shaped elevated bass, a little bit elevated upper mid-range, and a little bit elevated in the treble region. So moving out of frequency response, let's talk detail. Now the IER-Z1R is a very detailed IEM. However, it's not the most detailed IEM that I've ever heard. The U12T is pretty much right up there with about the most detailed IEM I've ever heard. This thing is ridiculously resolving. Even compared to, I'd say, even some headphones at the $2,000 price point, this thing has an incredible amount of resolution. It's incredibly resolving and just pulls out so many great micro details in your music. I really like the detail that the U12T has, and I think it is substantially ahead of the IER-Z1R in terms of resolution. However, the one area where the IER-Z1R wins in resolution over the U12T is in the bass. The IER-Z1R is pretty much known as the bass head in-game IEM, and that is for good reason. This thing has really crazy bass resolution and texture. Very similar to how like the Fostex TH900 is known for, not having like the greatest tonality and tuning overall, but it has that crazy, crazy good slam resolution texture. That's kind of what this thing is. This thing, I'm not a humongous fan of the tuning of this, but it has crazy good bass resolution and texture. This one is pretty much right up there with about the best bass you can get in IEM. I do want to hear the Tia Trio at home. It seems to be like slight downgrade in resolution over the 12, but better bass according to what I'm hearing from some people. But the IER-Z1R is known as the bass head in-game IEM for good reason. Now, as for tonality, as I mentioned, the U12T is a very nice tonality. I really like the tuning of this. Very, very pleasing and satisfying to me. The IER-Z1R, I'm not as much of a fan of. The lower mid-range is a little bit too recessed and kind of thin, and the female vocals are a little bit forward. And the treble, it doesn't bother me, but you can hear the little bit of peakiness. I don't think it's quite as smooth as it is on the U12T personally. Now, as for timbre, the U12T is 12 balanced armatures. However, it is quite good timbre for balanced armatures. Also has some of the best BA bass I've ever heard. I've heard many dynamic driver IEMs that don't have bass on the level that the U12T does. So it has very good bass and some of the best BA timbre that I've heard. It is not overly plasticky and harsh. It sounds fairly natural. There's a little bit of plasticiness in there, but very, very minimal. The IER-Z1R, on the other hand, I think sounds a little bit metallic, and I do think you can kind of hear the BA nature of the mids. Now, this IEM is using bass, or a dynamic driver for the bass, a balanced armature for the mids, and a tweeter, and a dynamic driver for the tweeter for the treble. And I do think you can sort of hear where the BA comes in the mids. It has a little bit of metallic-y timbre to it. And it's not the greatest timbre I've heard in an IEM personally. Now, as for dynamics, both are incredibly dynamic, as I already mentioned. The IER-Z1R, really good macro and micro dynamics, particularly in the bass. And the U12T, same thing, very, very dynamic IEMs, very good with micro details and resolving things like that. Now, as for head stage or soundstage, the IER-Z1R has a very wide stage, some of the widest stage I've heard in an IEM. It's a very nice, big, large presentation. The U12T is not overly narrow, but I'd say it's about average in terms of soundstage and presentation. And imaging on both of them is really, really good. They both image spectacularly, so nothing to worry about there. Okay, so now let's hop on into conclusions and my final thoughts here. Now, there's still a lot of IEMs in this price range I've not heard yet. The QDC and Null VX, some like the Empire ears and the Noble stuff. So we're not going to get into any of those kind of comparisons. We're just going to stick to these two IEMs here. Now, if you're going to ask which one am I going to take? Personally, I'm going with the U12T over the IER-Z1R. The IER-Z1R, to me, just seems like really the bass head end game, where I'm not a big fan of the tonality of it. The bass is really good. It has really good stage, and I like it a lot. Don't get me wrong, I really like it. But the U12T, to me, is more suited towards my preference in terms of tonality, and I really, really like how detailed this IEM is. But both of them are great. You really can't go wrong with either. It's just really going to depend on what you value. Like crazy, crazy bass, soundstage, and good detail. Or would you sacrifice some of that crazy bass resolution for still really good bass, but a lot of detail? And personally, this is more fitting to my preference. But both of these are spectacular. You really can't go wrong with either. And I definitely enjoy both. But personally, U12T is going to take it for me. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the 64 Audio U12T and the Sony IER-Z1R. Once again, thanks to Bloom Audio for sending out the 64s and to the viewer for sending out the Sonys. Links of where to buy both of these in the description below, as well as my Twitter, my contact email, and all other relevant information. But anyway, guys, look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.